In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a species that defies all understanding. They are neither the strongest nor the most technologically advanced. They lack the psychic abilities of the Mentari, the longevity of the eternal Kef, or the natural armor of the rock-born Titans. Yet every species in the known galaxy speaks their name with a mixture of reverence and terror. Humans. What makes them so feared? What makes even the most powerful galactic empires think twice before crossing them? It's not their weapons, though they craft tools of war with frightening creativity. It's not their numbers, for they are still young in the cosmic scale. It's something far more dangerous than any fleet or weapon: their memory. Humans never forget kindness, and they never ever forget a wrong. This is the story of what happens when a species with the memory of elephants and the heart of warriors decides that enough is enough, when the galaxy's forgotten act of kindness meets humanity's infinite capacity for both gratitude and vengeance. Some say the stars themselves trembled. Others claim whole worlds begged for mercy. All agree on one thing: when humans decide to repay their debts, the entire galaxy feels the consequence. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the UES Remembrance, watching the blue-green marble of Kepler 442b slowly rotate beneath them. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, its surface unmarked by the scars of war or the geometric patterns of advanced civilization. Only the occasional glint of metal from the scattered research stations betrayed any sign of intelligent life. "Beautiful world," remarked Dr. James Morrison, the expedition's chief archaeologist, as he joined Sarah at the viewport. His weathered hands clutched a steaming cup of coffee, the aroma mixing with the recycled air of the ship. "It should be," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a weight that made Morrison look at her more carefully. "Our records indicate this planet once supported a population of nearly 2 billion Virani." 2 billion? But the current population readings show maybe a few thousand scattered settlements. Sarah nodded grimly. The hegemony was thorough in their work. The galactic hegemony. Even 3 decades after humanity's first contact with the broader galactic community, the name still left a bitter taste in human mouths. The dominant political and military force in this spiral arm of the galaxy, the hegemony-controlled trade routes, dictated policy to hundreds of species and maintained what they called galactic order through fear and overwhelming force. To most species, the hegemony was simply a fact of life, like gravity. You didn't fight it. You learned to live with it. But humans, as the galaxy was slowly learning, were not most species. "Captain Chen," came the voice of Lieutenant Torres from the bridge communication system. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's in Virani, but the translation matrix is having trouble with the dialect." "Patch it through to Dr. Morrison," Sarah ordered. Morrison was one of only 12 humans who had mastered the complex tonal language of the Virani people. As Morrison listened to the transmission through his earpiece, his expression grew increasingly troubled. The Virani voice was elderly. Sarah could tell that much even without understanding the words. There was something in the tone, a mixture of hope and fear that transcended language barriers. "What are they saying?" Sarah asked. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he removed the earpiece. "They're asking if we're the humans. Specifically, they want to know if we're the children of remembrance. And, Captain, they're asking about someone called Marcus Webb." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus Webb. Even among humans, the name was spoken with reverence. Webb had been part of the first human diplomatic mission to make contact with alien civilizations 47 years ago. He died long before Sarah was born, but every human child learned his story in school. "Tell them yes," Sarah said quietly. "Tell them we remember Marcus Webb." The response from the planet's surface came almost immediately, and this time Sarah didn't need a translation to understand the emotion behind it. She could hear crying, voices raised in what could only be celebration. and underneath it all, the same elderly voice repeating something over and over. "What are they saying now?" she asked. Morrison wiped moisture from his eyes. "They're saying the debt will be paid." Over and over, "The debt will be paid." Within an hour, Sarah found herself in a shuttlecraft descending through Kepler 442b's atmosphere, accompanied by Morrison and a small diplomatic team. The coordinates the Varani had provided led them to a settlement that barely deserved the name. Perhaps 30 buildings constructed from a mixture of local stone and salvaged metal, home to maybe 300 souls. As the shuttle touched down in the settlement center, Sarah was struck by how quiet everything was. No children playing, no sounds of industry or commerce, just the whisper of wind through the sparse vegetation and the distant call of some native bird. The Virani who emerged to greet them moved slowly, many leaning on walking sticks or supporting each other. Sarah realized with a shock that most of them were elderly. Where were the young adults? Where were the children? The figure who approached their shuttle was ancient even by Virani standards. His gray-blue skin was marked with the deep ridges that came with extreme age, and his once-tall frame was bent with years. But his eyes, those large golden eyes that were the most striking feature of his species, burned with an intensity that made Sarah stand straighter. "I am Elder Thekvar," he said in accented but clear English. "I have waited 73 years to speak these words to a human. Marcus Webb saved my life." Sarah felt her breath catch. 73 years. That would place this meeting right around the time of first contact. "Elder, I'm honored to meet you," she replied, offering the traditional Virani greeting gesture that Morrison had taught her during the descent. "Can you tell us about Marcus Webb?" "Our records from that time are incomplete." The old Virani's eyes seemed to look past her, focusing on memories from decades past. "Your people had just made contact with the Galactic Council. Webb was part of a small diplomatic mission, trying to understand how your species might fit into the galactic community." Thekvar began walking toward the largest building in the settlement, his movements slow but determined. Sarah and her team followed. The hegemony had just finished what they called a pacification operation on my world, the elder continued. They had decided that Virani industrial capacity was being used to supply weapons to species that opposed their expansion. This was not true. But the hegemony does not require truth, only compliance. They entered the building, which Sarah realized was some sort of memorial hall. The walls were covered with images, photographs, paintings, and even crude sketches, all showing the same thing: Virani cities burning, massive hegemony warships in orbit, and the aftermath of orbital bombardment. "They killed 2 billion of my people in a single day," Thekvar said, his voice never wavering. "Those who survived were scattered, made refugees on their own world. I was one of those refugees, a young engineer then, trying to help build shelters for the survivors." Sarah studied the images on the walls. The devastation was absolute. Entire continents reduced to radioactive waste. Oceans boiled away. The very atmosphere of the planet damaged. She had seen records of hegemony military actions before, but this was different. This was genocide. "The Galactic Council did nothing," Thekvar continued. "They issued their standard statement of concern and hope for peaceful resolution. Your human delegation was present for those discussions. Most of them said nothing as well." "But not Marcus Webb," Morrison said softly. The elder's golden eyes brightened. "Not Marcus Webb. After the council session ended, he came to find me. I was camped with other refugees in what had been a park in the capital city. Webb brought supplies, medical equipment, food, water purification tablets, things your ship could spare." The Kvar moved to a display case in the center of the hall. Inside was what appeared to be a small electronic device, no bigger than Sarah's thumb. But more than supplies, he brought this: A human quantum communicator. He gave it to me and said, "Someday when my people are strong enough to matter in this galaxy, call us. We will remember what was done here." Sarah stared at the device. Quantum communicators had been experimental technology 47 years ago, hugely expensive and barely reliable over interstellar distances. Webb had given away what might have been his only means of emergency contact with Earth. He said humans never forget kindness, Thekvar continued. But more importantly, he said humans never forget injustice. He promised that someday, when your species had the power to do something about what happened here, you would return. And you kept that communicator for 73 years? Sarah asked. I kept it, the elder confirmed, even when the power cells failed and I had no way to recharge them. Even when other survivors said I was foolish to believe in the promises of a species we had just met. Even when the hegemony patrols came through and searched our settlements, I hid it and kept it safe. Sarah looked around at the other Virani in the memorial hall, all elderly, all watching her with the same mixture of hope and desperation she had heard in that first transmission. Elder Thekvar, she said carefully. Our species has grown in strength since Marcus Webb made his promise. We now have 12 core worlds, nearly 300 colony systems, and military assets that rival many galactic powers. But the hegemony is still the dominant force in this region. If we were to act against them, you would risk your own people, Thekvar finished. Yes, I understand this. And I would not ask you to honor a promise made by one human if doing so would bring destruction to all humans. The elder moved to another display case, this one containing what looked like carved stone tablets. But there are things you should know before you make your decision. Things that Marcus Webb could not have known when he made his promise. Sarah leaned closer to examine the tablets. The writing was in Old Virani, a script so ancient that Morrison would need time to translate it. These are historical records, Thekvar explained. The complete archives of our civilization, saved by scholars who knew what was coming. They contain not just the history of the Virene, but intelligence we gathered about the hegemony over centuries of contact. Intelligence? Sarah asked. The elder's golden eyes met hers directly. The locations of every hegemony military installation within 50 light years. The political weaknesses of their ruling council, the species who secretly support rebellion but are too afraid to act, technical specifications of their weapons and shields. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was military intelligence that would be worth thousands of human lives in any conflict with the hegemony. Why didn't you share this with the Galactic Council? The council thought, was bitter. The council? They are either controlled by the hegemony or too frightened to oppose them. For 73 years, I have watched species after species bow their heads and accept hegemony rule, not because they agree with it, but because they believe resistance is impossible. He moved to the final display case, and Sarah gasped. Inside was a holographic star chart showing this entire region of the galaxy. But overlaid on it were symbols and notations in dozens of different languages. This is the real reason I have waited for humans to return, Thekvar said. We have been in contact with resistance movements throughout the sector, species who remember their own dead worlds, their own scattered peoples, all waiting for someone strong enough to stand against the hegemony. And how many? Sarah asked. 47 species with significant populations, with 12 with functioning military forces, 3 with technology that rivals or exceeds hegemony standard equipment. Sarah stared at the star chart, her mind racing. This wasn't just intelligence about one species' revenge against the hegemony. This was a potential galactic uprising. Elder, this changes everything. D. I need to contact Earth immediately. Of course, Thekvar replied. But first, there is something else you must see. He led them from the memorial hall to a smaller building nearby. As they approached, Sarah noticed that this structure was different from the others. Where the other buildings showed signs of age and improvised construction, this one appeared to be maintained with almost religious care. Inside, Sarah found herself in what could only be described as a shrine, but not to any Virani deity or cultural figure. The walls were covered with images and information about humanity, news articles about human expansion, technical specifications of human ships, even what appeared to be human poetry translated into Virani. At the center of the shrine was a portrait of Marcus Webb, painted with such skill and care that Sarah felt she could have reached out and spoken to the man himself. "We have watched your species for 73 years, Thekvar explained. Studied your history, your culture, your ways of war and peace. Do you know what we learned?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. "We learned that Marcus Webb was not unusual among humans. Every generation of your people produces individuals who will risk everything to help strangers. Who will stand against overwhelming odds because they believe it is right? Who will sacrifice their own comfort to ease the suffering of others?" The elder moved to stand before Webb's portrait. "But we also learn that when humans are pushed too far, when they finally decide that enough is enough, they become the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because you are cruel, but because you combine compassion with absolute determination. Because you fight not just for victory, but for justice." Sarah found herself standing straighter, feeling the weight of not just her own species' expectations, but the hopes of dozens of oppressed civilizations. "The hegemony believes they know humans," Thekvar continued. "They think you are just another young species that will eventually bend the knee like all the others. They have no idea what they are dealing with." "What do you want from us?" Sarah asked. The old Virani turned to face her directly. "Marcus Webb promised that humans would remember. He promised that when your people were strong enough, you would return. Well, Captain Chen, you have returned. And the question now is simple. Will you honor that promise?" Sarah looked around the shrine, at the carefully maintained records of human achievement and the portrait of a man who had died before she was born, but whose promise had shaped the lives of an entire species. "I cannot make that decision alone," she said finally. "This choice belongs to all of humanity." "Then contact your leaders," Thekvar said. "Tell them that the debt Marcus Webb incurred on behalf of your species is ready to be paid. Tell them that we have waited 73 years, and we are ready to wait longer if necessary. But also tell them that we are not the only ones waiting." Sarah nodded and activated her communicator to contact the remembrance. Within minutes, she was connected to the ship's quantum communication array, and from there to the Human Colonial Authority on Earth. As she waited for the connection to establish, Sarah found herself looking again at the portrait of Marcus Webb. The artist had captured something in his eyes, a mixture of sadness and determination that she recognized. It was the same expression she had seen in the mirror every morning since taking command of the Remembrance. "This is Admiral Harrison, Colonial Authority Command," came the voice through her communicator. "Admiral, this is Captain Chen aboard the Remembrance. I'm transmitting our complete survey data from Kepler Psi NT 442b, but I need to speak with you immediately about a priority alpha situation." "Go ahead, Captain." Sarah took a deep breath. "Sir, we've made contact with survivors from the Virani civilization. They have intelligence on hegemony military assets and evidence of a multi-species resistance network. They're also calling in a debt that dates back to first contact." There was a long pause before Harrison responded. "Captain, are you telling me that our first diplomatic contact resulted in a binding obligation to go to war with the galactic hegemony?" "Sir," Sarah replied, looking at the faces of the elderly Virani watching her with desperate hope, "I'm telling you that a human made a promise 73 years ago, and these people have never stopped believing we would keep it." Another pause, longer this time. Understood, Captain. Maintain your position and prepare for the arrival of the diplomatic fleet. And Captain? Yes, sir? Start putting together a complete intelligence briefing. If we're going to honor Webb's promise, we're going to need to know exactly what we're getting into. As Sarah ended the transmission, Elder Thekvar approached her. Your leaders will consider our request? He asked. Sarah looked at the old Varani, thinking about human history and the way her species had always responded to calls for help from those who could not help themselves. Elder, she said, I suspect that in about 72 hours, you're going to discover just how seriously humans take their promises. The Colonial Authority Council chamber on Luna had never hosted a more diverse group of military officers, diplomats, scientists, and historians. Admiral Harrison stood at the head of the massive holographic display showing the galactic sector around Kepler 442b, watching as the last of the attendees took their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison began. 73 years ago, Lieutenant Marcus Webb made a promise to an alien species on behalf of all humanity. Today, we decide whether that promise dies with the man who made it, or whether it becomes the foundation for the largest military operation in human history. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the Council's chief historian, activated her presentation display. Before we discuss military options, I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what Marcus Webb committed us to. The display showed archival footage from humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council. Webb appeared impossibly young, his dress uniform crisp and his eyes bright with the excitement of representing his entire species on the galactic stage. Webb was 26 years old, Santos continued, a junior officer on a diplomatic mission led by Ambassador Chen, Captain Sarah Chen's grandfather, incidentally. The official mission was to establish formal relations with the galactic community and determine humanity's place in it. The footage shifted to show the Galactic Council chambers, a massive amphitheater that could hold representatives from hundreds of species. Webb sat in the human delegation section, taking notes as various alien dignitaries delivered speeches about peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. What Webb witnessed in those chambers was the systematic justification of genocide, Santos said quietly. The Virani had been exterminated just days before humanity's arrival, and the Council was already moving to ratify the hegemony's actions as necessary for galactic stability. General Morrison, head of the Colonial Defense Force, leaned forward. Dr. Santos, what exactly did Webb promise? We need to understand the legal and moral implications. Santos touched her control pad, and the display shifted to show Webb's personal logs recovered from his effects after his death in a shuttle accident 15 years later. Webb's own words, she said, and activated the audio. Webb's voice, young and determined, filled the chamber. I found the Virani survivors camped in what used to be their capital city. The hegemony had bombed them back to the Stone Age in a single day. 2 billion people. Dead because they supposedly supplied weapons to rebels. When I asked the Council for aid, they told me that interference in hegemony internal affairs was not permitted. The recording paused, and Santos looked around the room. What Webb did next was technically outside his authority as a junior officer, but he acted as a human being first. The recording continued. I gave them everything we could spare from the ship, medical supplies, food, water purification equipment, but more importantly, I gave them something to hope for. I told them that humanity would remember what happened here. I promised that when we were strong enough to matter, we would return. That's it? Asked Admiral Zhang, commander of the Third Fleet. That's the promise we're supposed to honor? The word of one junior officer acting outside his authority? Dr. Santos smiled grimly. There's more, Admiral. The recording resumed. I've been thinking about what it means to be human in a galaxy that seems to run on fear and oppression. Every species we've met bows to the hegemony because they believe resistance is impossible. But humans have never been good at accepting the impossible. Our entire history is built on people who refuse to accept that might makes right. Webb's voice grew stronger. So I made them a promise. I told them that humans never forget kindness, and we never forget injustice. I told them that someday, when we had the power to act, we would return to settle the debt, not just for them, but for every species that's been ground under the hegemony's boot. The chamber was silent as Webb's voice faded. Finally, Admiral Harrison spoke. Dr. Santos, you said there was more. What else do we know about Webb's actions? Webb's promise wasn't made in isolation, Santos replied. After he returned to Earth, he spent the rest of his life advocating for military expansion and intelligence gathering focused on the hegemony. Many of our current strategic doctrines can be traced back to analyses he wrote in his later years. She brought up another display showing Webb's published papers and policy recommendations. Webb understood that his promise would eventually require humanity to go to war with the most powerful military force in the galaxy. He spent 15 years trying to prepare us for that war. General Morrison studied the display. What kind of preparations? Webb advocated for what he called asymmetric force multiplication, Santos explained. He believed that humans could never match the hegemony ship for ship, but that we could succeed by leveraging our unique advantages, adaptability, creativity, and willingness to take risks that other species would consider insane. Unique advantages? Every species thinks they're special. Not like this, Santos replied, bringing up comparative psychological profiles. Webb commissioned studies comparing human military psychology to that of other species. The results were illuminating. The display showed brain scans and behavioral analysis charts comparing humans to various alien species. Most galactic species evolved from prey animals or herd creatures. They have strong survival instincts and excellent pattern recognition, but they're fundamentally risk-averse. Humans evolved as pursuit predators. We're literally built to chase things until they die of exhaustion. Dr. Rachel Kim, the council xenopsychologist, stood up. The implications of this research have become more clear as we've encountered more species. Humans are among the few galactic species that routinely engage in behavior that other species classify as insane. Such as? Harrison asked. Charging fortified positions, ramming maneuvers in space combat, self-sacrifice to protect strangers, operating equipment beyond safe parameters, refusing to surrender even when victory is impossible. Kim paused. The hegemony's entire military doctrine is based on the assumption that defeated enemies will surrender when resistance becomes costly. Humans don't. You're saying that Webb predicted we could defeat the hegemony because we're too stupid to know when we're beaten? Not stupid, Kim replied. Stubborn. There's a difference. General Morrison activated his own display, showing current Colonial Defense Force assets. Let's talk numbers. The hegemony controls approximately 800 star systems and maintains a standing military force of over 2 million vessels of various classes. Humanity has 12 core worlds, 300 colonies, and maybe 50,000 ships that could be classified as military assets. The odds are not encouraging, Harrison admitted. Unless, Santos interjected, Webb was right about asymmetric warfare. She brought up Captain Chen's intelligence report from Kepler 442b. The Virani have given us something Webb could never have anticipated. A complete intelligence picture of hegemony assets, and a ready-made alliance with dozens of oppressed species. The display showed the star chart from Thekvar's Memorial Hall, now enhanced with human tactical analysis. Red markers indicated hegemony military installations, while green markers showed potential allied forces. 47 species with significant populations, Santos continued. 12 with functioning military forces. 3 with technology that equals or exceeds hegemony standards. If Webb's promise could unite these forces under human leadership, we'd still be outnumbered, Morrison pointed out. But not outgunned, Zhang said, studying the tactical display more carefully. Some of these species have capabilities we've only dreamed of. The Cathani have mastered quantum phase technology. The Zephyrians have ships that can maneuver inside stellar coronas. The Void Singers can navigate without using hyperspace lanes. Harrison looked around the chamber. The question before us is simple. Do we honor Webb's promise? The legal implications are staggering, said Counselor Williams, the representative for Colonial Legal Affairs. If we acknowledge that individual humans can commit our entire species to military action, we set a precedent that could— Counselor, Harrison interrupted. With respect, this isn't about legal precedent. This is about whether we're the kind of species that keeps its word. Admiral Zhang stood up. I want to play devil's advocate for a moment. Webb made his promise when humanity was weak and insignificant. We had nothing to lose and everything to gain by making grand gestures. Now we have 300 worlds and billions of people who could die if this goes wrong. Do we really want to risk everything for the sake of one man's promise? The chamber fell silent. It was the question everyone had been thinking, but no one had wanted to voice. Dr. Kim activated her display again. Admiral, may I show you something? The display showed polling data from across human space. We've been monitoring public opinion since Captain Chen's report was declassified 6 hours ago. 78% of humans surveyed believe we should honor Webb's promise. 86% believe that abandoning the Varani would fundamentally change what it means to be human. Public opinion doesn't dictate military strategy, Jean replied. No, but it dictates whether our military will fight, General Morrison said quietly. Admiral, I've been in command of human forces for 20 years. I can tell you with absolute certainty that human soldiers don't fight for territory or resources or political objectives. They fight for each other and for the idea that some things are worth dying for. Morrison stood and moved to the tactical display. If we tell our forces that we're abandoning the Virani because it's too dangerous to keep our word, what do you think happens to unit cohesion? What happens to morale? What happens when those same soldiers are asked to risk their lives for the next mission? Admiral Harrison nodded slowly. The general makes a good point. Our military effectiveness depends on trust. Trust between soldiers, trust in their commanders, and trust in the principles we claim to represent. There's another consideration, Santos added. Webb's promise isn't just known to the Virani. Captain Chen's report indicates that dozens of species have been watching humanity for decades, specifically because of stories about our willingness to help the helpless. If we abandon the Virani now, we don't just break faith with them, we destroy our credibility with every potential ally in the galaxy. Chang shook his head. So you're saying we have to go to war because our reputation depends on it? I'm saying we have to go to war because not going to war means becoming a different species entirely, Santos replied. Webb didn't just promise military assistance. He promised that humanity would remember injustice and act to correct it. That promise has shaped our foreign policy, our military doctrine, and our cultural identity for 7 decades. Harrison looked at the tactical display, studying the projected force distributions and battle scenarios. General Morrison, assuming we decide to honor Webb's promise, what would such an operation look like? Morrison activated a series of tactical projections. It would have to be a coordinated uprising across multiple star systems simultaneously, hit-and-run attacks on isolated hegemony installations, followed by a rapid consolidation of Allied forces. The key would be speed and surprise. Casualties? Harrison asked. Impossible to estimate accurately. Could be anywhere from tens of thousands to complete annihilation of human civilization. Odds of success? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Unknown. This would be unlike any military operation in galactic history. Success would depend on factors we can't predict or control. Admiral Zhang leaned back in his chair. So we're being asked to risk the survival of our entire species based on incomplete intelligence, unknown allies, and a promise made by a junior officer 73 years ago. Yes, Harrison replied simply. The chamber was silent for several minutes as each member considered the implications. Finally, Dr. Santos spoke. May I remind everyone of something? Webb wasn't just a junior officer. He was a human being who saw genocide and decided he couldn't walk away. He didn't have the authority to speak for our species, but he had something more important, the courage to act according to human principles, even when it was dangerous. She stood and moved to the center of the chamber. The question isn't whether Webb had the legal authority to make his promise. The question is whether we have the moral authority to break it. Counselor Williams cleared his throat. Dr. Santos, you're asking us to potentially sacrifice human civilization for the sake of moral consistency. No, Santos replied. I'm suggesting that a human civilization that abandons its principles to ensure its survival isn't worth preserving. I'm calling for a preliminary vote. All in favor of authorizing the military to begin planning for Operation Remembrance, the fulfillment of Marcus Webb's promise to the Virani people. Hands began to rise around the chamber. Santos, immediately. Morrison, without hesitation. Dr. Stacia. Kim, after a moment of consideration. Admiral Zhang reluctantly. One by one, every member of the Colonial Authority Council raised their hand. Motion carries unanimously. Harrison announced, God help us all. As the meeting broke up, Admiral Zhang approached Harrison. Sir, I want to be clear. I voted yes, but I still think this is the most dangerous decision humanity has ever made. Harrison nodded. You're probably right, Admiral, but it's also the most human decision we've ever made. 3 days later, Captain Chen received new orders aboard the Remembrance. She was to return to Earth immediately to take command of the largest fleet in human history. 1,200 ships from across human space, crewed by volunteers who had requested assignment to what the media was already calling Webb's Fleet. Chen visited Elder Thekvar one last time in the Memorial Hall. Your people have decided, the old Virani asked. We have, Chen replied. In 30 days, representatives from every allied species will meet at Kepler 442b to coordinate our response to the hegemony. Thekvar's golden eyes filled with moisture. Marcus Webb would be proud. Chen looked at Webb's portrait, thinking about the chain of events that had led from one man's promise to the largest military mobilization in human history. Elder, can I ask you something? In all these years, did you ever doubt that we would return? The old Virani was quiet for a moment. Only once, he admitted. When I heard that Webb had died in an accident, I thought perhaps the promise had died with him. But then I learned more about humans and I realized my mistake. Deb, what mistake? I thought the promise belonged to Marcus Webb. But it didn't, did it? It belonged to all of humanity. Webb was just the voice that spoke it into existence. As Chen's shuttle lifted off from Kepler 442b's surface, she could see lights beginning to appear in settlements across the planet. For the first time in 73 years, the Virani had reason to hope. But in the depths of space, hegemony listening posts had detected the unusual quantum communications traffic around Kepler 442b. Reports were being compiled, analyses conducted, and threat assessments prepared. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans make a promise, they keep it, even when keeping it means going to war with the stars themselves. The space around Kepler 442b had never seen so much traffic. Ships from 47 different species converged on the system, their diverse designs creating a tapestry of alien engineering that would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Remembrance, watching as the largest gathering of free species in galactic history assembled itself. Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Cathani vessel, Eternal Vigil. Reported Lieutenant Torres, Admiral Vashti requests permission to come aboard. Sarah nodded. Grant permission. Have them use Docking Bay 7. She paused, then added, and Torres, make sure our xenobiology team is standing by. The Kethani live for over 1,000 years. Admiral Vashti might have personal memories of things we only know from history books. As the alien delegation made their way through the Remembrance's corridors, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her first meeting with Elder Thekvar. Webb's fleet had arrived 2 weeks ago, but it had taken time for the various alien resistance movements to overcome decades of secrecy and caution. Many species had sent only small delegations initially, afraid that the gathering might be a hegemony trap. The arrival of the Kethani had changed everything. The Kethani were legends in this part of the galaxy, an ancient species that had mastered quantum phase technology. They could slip their ships between dimensions, making them nearly impossible to track or attack. The hegemony had never successfully conquered a single Kethani world, despite centuries of attempts. When Admiral Vashti had arrived with a full battle squadron and announced their support for the human-led alliance, other species had quickly followed. "Admiral on deck!" called out Torres as the alien delegation entered the bridge. Sarah got her first look at Admiral Vashti and had to suppress a gasp. The Kethani were tall and graceful, with crystalline skin that seemed to shift color in the light. But Vashti was clearly ancient even by their standards. Her crystalline form was clouded with age, and her movements carried the weight of centuries. "Captain Chin," Vashti said in perfect English, her voice carrying harmonics that human ears could barely perceive. "I bring greetings from the Eternal Council of Kethani. We have waited 800 years to meet a species willing to challenge the hegemony. Admiral, the honor is ours." But 800 years? The hegemony hasn't existed that long. Vashti's expression shifted in what Sarah had learned was the Kethani equivalent of a sad smile. The hegemony is merely the current name for an old evil, Captain. The core species that control it have been conquering and enslaving others for over a millennium. They have changed their name, their government structure, their stated ideology, but their essential nature remains the same. She moved to the main display, gesturing to the star chart showing hegemony space. "We have watched empire after empire rise and fall, always promising peace and prosperity, always delivering only subjugation and death. The hegemony is simply the most successful version of a very old pattern." "Why haven't the Kethani acted before now?" Sarah asked. "Because we learned long ago that revolutionary movements led by single species inevitably become new empires," Vashti replied. "The only way to break the cycle is to have a coalition led by a species that genuinely believes in freedom for others, not just for themselves. We have been watching humanity for decades, Captain. We have seen how your species treats its own colonies, how it negotiates with other species, how it responds to calls for help. We believe that humans might be the first species in galactic history capable of winning a war without becoming the thing you fought against." Before Sarah could respond, Torres announced another incoming transmission. "Captain, we're receiving a message from the Zephyrian flotilla. They say it's urgent." The main screen shifted to show a Zephyrian commander, her bird-like features tense with urgency. The Zephyrians were another legendary species, masters of stellar engineering who could build ships capable of operating inside stars themselves. "Human Captain," the Zephyrian said, "our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive hegemony fleet movements. They are mobilizing forces from across their territory." Sarah felt her stomach drop. How massive? Preliminary estimates indicate over 10,000 vessels converging on staging areas within 100 light-years of your position. This appears to be the largest military mobilization in hegemony history. Admiral Vashti's crystalline form darkened. "They know. Somehow, the hegemony has learned about our gathering." "Recommendations?" Sarah asked. The Zephyrian commander consulted her instruments. "The assembled hegemony forces will be in position to attack this system within 72 hours. All Allied vessels should disperse immediately to prevent catastrophic losses." Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. She could see the same thought in all their eyes. Marcus Webb's promise was about to be tested in fire. Admiral Vashti, can the Kethani phase technology help us avoid detection if we relocate the fleet? For a time, yes. But Captain, if we scatter now, it may be impossible to reassemble this alliance. Many species will see retreat as proof that resistance is hopeless. Sarah moved to the tactical station and began calling up force projections. Webb's fleet consisted of 1,200 human vessels of various classes. The Allied species had contributed another 800 ships. Against 10,000 hegemony vessels, the mathematics were brutal. Captain, Torres said quietly, we're receiving transmission requests from Allied vessels throughout the system. They want orders. Sarah realized that somehow, without any formal declaration or ceremony, she had become the military leader of the largest free alliance in galactic history. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. Open a channel to all Allied vessels, she ordered. As the communication links established, Sarah found herself looking at dozens of alien faces on her screen. Some species she recognized from intelligence briefings. Others were completely unknown to her, but all were watching her with the same expression, desperate hope mixed with fear. Fellow captains and commanders, she began, we have just learned that the hegemony is mobilizing forces to destroy this alliance before it can act. They are sending 10,000 ships to crush us. She could see reactions rippling through the alien faces on her screen. Some species began talking among themselves in their native languages. Others simply stared in shock. We have 3 options, Sarah continued. We can scatter and hope to rebuild the alliance later. We can retreat to a more defensible position and prepare for a siege. Or we can do what the hegemony least expects. She paused, thinking about Marcus Webb and the promise that had brought them all together. We can attack first. The communication channel erupted in alien languages as the various species began debating among themselves. Sarah waited for the noise to die down before continuing. The hegemony believes that resistance to their rule is impossible because they have never faced a truly united opposition. Every previous rebellion has been led by a single species fighting for their own freedom. But we are different. We are 47 species united not by shared genetics or culture, but by shared principles. Admiral Vashti spoke up from her position near the tactical display. Captain Chen, what exactly are you proposing? Sarah activated the holographic battle display showing the current positions of all known forces. Intelligence provided by the Virani indicates that the hegemony Central Command Facility is located in the Nexus system, approximately 80 light-years from here. While they are gathering forces to attack us, their core infrastructure is more lightly defended than it has been in centuries. She highlighted the target system on the display. The Nexus system contains not just military command facilities, but also the central communication hubs that coordinate hegemony operations across hundreds of worlds. If we can capture or destroy those facilities, we can blind their entire military force. The Zephyrian commander looked skeptical. Captain Chen even lightly defended, the Nexus system will have significant fortifications, and we would have to travel through hegemony space to reach it. That's where our diverse capabilities become an advantage, Sarah replied. Kethani phase technology can get our strike force past their detection networks. Zephyrian stellar engineering can provide ships capable of operating in the Nexus system's dangerous environment. Human tactical doctrine can coordinate the attack itself. She looked directly at the camera, knowing her words were being transmitted to every ship in the system. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications, Marcus Webb promised the Virani that humanity would remember injustice and act to correct it. But that promise was never just about the Virani. It was about the principle that someone, somewhere, must be willing to stand up to tyranny even when victory seems impossible. A new voice joined the conversation. It was Elder Thekvar, transmitting from the surface of Kepler 442b. Captain Chen speaks truth. For 73 years, my people have waited for someone to honor Webb's promise. But we are not the only ones who have been waiting. The display shifted to show a transmission from the memorial hall where Sarah had first met Thekvar, but now the hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all standing together beneath Marcus Webb's portrait. Every species here has their own Marcus Webb, Thekvar continued. Their own hero who died believing that someday someone would be strong enough to make their sacrifice meaningful. Today, we have the chance to honor all of them. Boo, boo. Sarah watched the faces on her screen as Thekvar's words sank in. She could see the moment when hope began to overcome fear, when the desire for freedom overcame the instinct for survival. All vessels, Sarah announced. Prepare for immediate departure. Navigation coordinates are being transmitted now. We jumped to the Nexus system in 6 hours. The communication channel erupted again, but this time the alien voices were coordinating logistics and battle plans rather than debating whether to fight. As the channel closed, Admiral Vashti approached Sarah. Captain, you realize this is likely a one-way mission? Even if we succeed in taking the Nexus system, the hegemony response will be overwhelming. Sarah nodded. Admiral, do you know what Marcus Webb wrote in his personal logs the night before he died? Vashti shook her head. He wrote that the greatest tragedy would not be if humans died fighting for freedom, but if humans lived as slaves because they were afraid to fight. Sarah moved to the view screen, looking out at the massive fleet assembling around them. Webb understood that some promises are worth dying to keep. 6 hours later, the largest mixed-species fleet in galactic history jumped to hyperspace. Their destination, the heart of hegemony power. Their mission, to prove that tyranny, no matter how powerful, could not stand against united opposition. As the stars stretched into lines around them, Sarah thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. One man's promise to a dying people had grown into a galactic revolution. She wondered if Webb could have imagined that his words in a refugee camp would someday inspire beings from dozens of worlds to risk everything for freedom. On her private communication channel, Sarah received a message from Earth. It was from Admiral Harrison, the man who had authorized this entire operation. Sarah, the message said, whatever happens in the next few days, know that humanity is proud of you. Webb made a promise, but you're the one making it real. Godspeed. As the fleet raced through hyperspace toward the unknown, Sarah realized that they were about to learn something fundamental about the universe, whether justice was stronger than power, whether hope could overcome fear, and whether a promise made in kindness could become a force capable of shaking the galaxy itself. Behind them, the hegemony's massive battle fleet was still converging on Kepler 442b, expecting to find their enemies waiting to be destroyed. Instead, they would find empty space and a message transmitted on all frequencies. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Fleet, speaking on behalf of the Free Species Alliance. For too long, the galaxy has accepted that might makes right. Today, we prove that wrong. We have not come to conquer or rule, but to liberate. To every oppressed species, every enslaved world, every being who dreams of freedom, your liberation begins now. The message was signed with a simple phrase that would become the rallying cry of the rebellion. Promises kept, debts paid, justice served. The galactic hegemony was about to learn that, when humans make a promise, the entire universe conspires to help them keep it. The Nexus system defied every principle of stellar engineering that Captain Sarah Chen thought she understood. 3 massive artificial structures orbited the system's binary stars, each one larger than Earth's moon and connected to the others by bridges of pure energy that somehow remained stable despite the gravitational chaos of the dual-star environment. My God, whispered Dr. Morrison as the Free Species Alliance fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. How is this possible? Admiral Vashti's crystalline form shimmered with what Sarah had learned was the Kethani expression of deep concern. This is not the hegemony technology we expected to find. These structures are far older and far more advanced. The massive fleet, nearly 2,000 ships from 47 different species, hung in space as their sensors tried to make sense of what they were seeing. The Zephyrian vessels, built to operate in stellar environments, immediately began deep scans of the energy bridges connecting the 3 orbital platforms. "Captain," reported Commander Cathari of the Zephyrian flotilla, her bird-like voice tight with worry, "those energy constructs are not technology. They are living beings." Daw. Daw. Sarah stared at the display showing the energy bridges. Now that she looked more closely, she could see movement within the streams of light, patterns that suggested consciousness rather than mechanical function. "Are you saying the hegemony is using enslaved energy beings to maintain their command center?" "That appears to be the case," Vashti confirmed. "Captain, I must inform you that Kithani records mention such beings. They were the original inhabitants of this region of space, existing in pure energy form for millions of years before solid matter species evolved. We believe they had been extinct for millennia." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "They're not extinct. They're prisoners." The tactical display updated as more intelligence flowed in from the fleet's sensors. The 3 orbital platforms were heavily defended, with shield generators powered by the energy beings themselves. Thousands of hegemony ships patrolled the inner system, and weapon platforms dotted the space between the orbital structures. "Fleet status report," Sarah ordered. The reports came in from 47 species in dozens of languages, translated by the fleet's communication systems. Despite the overwhelming nature of their target, not a single ship requested permission to withdraw. "All vessels report ready for combat operations," Torres announced. "Captain, we're also receiving a transmission from the surface of the 2nd orbital platform. It's unusual. Put it through." The voice that came through the communication system was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It seemed to resonate from everywhere at once, speaking directly to her mind rather than her ears. "Free travelers," the voice said, "we have waited eons for someone to challenge the enslavers. We are the Luminari, the first children of this galaxy's stars. The creatures you call the hegemony have bound us to their will for 1,000 years, using our life force to power their empire of oppression." Sarah exchanged glances with Admiral Vashti. "Are you saying you want to help us?" "We are saying that your fight and ours are the same. Free us from our bonds, and the hegemony's greatest weapon becomes your ally. But be warned, the enslavers have prepared defenses specifically designed to counter united opposition. They have learned from watching your species' history." Before Sarah could respond, the fleet sensors detected massive movement throughout the Nexus system. Hegemony ships were abandoning their patrol routes and converging on 3 strategic positions around each orbital platform. "They're forming a defensive grid," observed General Morrison, the human fleet's tactical coordinator. "But it's not a standard formation. They're positioning themselves to maximize crossfire between friendly forces." Admiral Vashti studied the enemy movements with growing alarm. "Captain, that is a formation designed to force attacking forces to fire through their own allies to reach targets. They know we are a coalition fleet with limited coordination protocols." Sarah realized with growing horror what the hegemony was doing. "They're trying to make us kill each other. If we attack those positions, our own weapons fire will hit allied ships. It's worse than that," Morrison added. "Look at the spacing. They've calculated the exact positions where different species' weapon systems will interfere with each other. Kethani phase weapons will destabilize Zephyrian plasma conduits. Human missile systems will trigger Virani energy shields prematurely." The communication channel crackled to life again, this time with a different voice, cold, mechanical, and absolutely confident. "Attention, Rebel Fleet. I am Hegemon Prime, Supreme Commander of Galactic Hegemony Forces. You have made a tactical error that will result in the destruction of your entire alliance. The main display shifted to show the speaker, a being encased in mechanical armor, with cybernetic implants that had long since replaced most of its organic components. For 1,000 years, the hegemony has maintained galactic order by understanding the fundamental truth that diverse species cannot truly cooperate. You may share common enemies, but you lack common tactics, common trust. Your diversity, which you see as strength, is actually your greatest weakness. Sarah could see the truth of the hegemon's words in the faces of her allied commanders. The defensive grid was designed to exploit every difference between species, every incompatibility in their technologies and tactics. Observe, the hegemon continued, as your alliance destroys itself. Instead, they targeted the energy beings connecting the orbital platforms. The luminaries screamed in pain, their voices somehow reaching every ship in the fleet simultaneously. "They're torturing them," Sarah whispered, "and forcing us to watch," Vashti added. "Captain, this is psychological warfare designed to provoke us into an emotional response rather than a tactical one." Sarah looked at the tactical display, seeing the trap clearly now. If they attacked the defensive grid, Allied ships would be caught in crossfire from their own fleet. If they didn't attack, the hegemony would continue torturing the Luminari until the Alliance either retreated in shame or broke apart from internal conflict over what to do. Captain Torres reported, "We're receiving private communication requests from several Allied vessels. Some are requesting permission to withdraw. Others are proposing immediate attack despite the tactical situation." Sarah could feel the alliance starting to fracture exactly as the hegemon had predicted. 47 species, each with their own military traditions and moral codes, were reaching 47 different conclusions about how to respond. "All vessels," Sarah announced on the general communication channel, "maintain current positions. I need 5 minutes to consult with Allied commanders." She switched to a secured channel connecting her with the senior commanders of each species group. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications," she began, "we are facing exactly the kind of trap that has prevented effective coalition warfare throughout galactic history. The hegemony wants us to choose between tactical effectiveness and moral consistency." Admiral Vashti spoke first. "Captain Chen, Kithani Tactical Doctrine would recommend immediate withdrawal to reassess. This defensive formation cannot be broken without massive Allied casualties. Zephyrian Honor Code requires us to attack immediately to end the suffering of the energy beings. Tactical considerations are secondary to moral imperatives." As Sarah listened to the debate, she realized that every species was applying their own cultural framework to the situation. The hegemony had indeed designed a trap that exploited the fundamental differences between allied species. But, as the arguments continued, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus Webb and the promise that had brought them all together. Webb hadn't promised tactical perfection or strategic brilliance. He had promised that humans would remember injustice and act to correct it, regardless of the personal cost. Allied commanders, Sarah interrupted, "I want to share something with you." When Marcus Webb made his promise to the Virani, humanity was the weakest species in the galaxy. We had no significant military force, no political influence, no advanced technology. All Webb had was the belief that doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. She activated her tactical display, highlighting the positions of all Allied forces. "The hegemony's trap assumes that we will act according to standard military doctrine, trying to minimize casualties and maximize tactical advantage. But we're not here because of standard military doctrine. We're here because 47 species decided that freedom was worth dying for." Sarah began transmitting new tactical coordinates to the fleet. "Here's what we're going to do. Every ship, regardless of species or capability, is going to jump simultaneously to point-blank range of the nearest hegemony vessel. We're going to turn this battle into the kind of close-range chaos where superior numbers and coordinated tactics become irrelevant." Communication channel erupted in alarm as alien commanders protested the apparent suicide mission. Captain Chen Vashti said, "That maneuver will result in massive casualties across all Allied forces. Many ships will be destroyed by friendly fire, and others will be overwhelmed by close-range hegemony weapons." "You're right," Sarah replied, "but it will also completely negate their defensive grid. When every ship is in close combat with enemy forces, there are no clear firing lanes, no coordinated defensive positions, and no way to use our diversity against us." G paused, thinking about Webb's words about humans being willing to take risks that other species considered insane. The hegemony's entire strategy depends on the assumption that we value our ships and crews more than our mission. They believe that when faced with certain casualties, we'll choose retreat over victory. But they don't understand what makes this alliance different from every other rebellion in galactic history. Sarah opened the channel to address the entire fleet. "All vessels, this is Captain Chen. In 30 seconds, we're going to do something that every tactical manual in the galaxy says is impossible. We're going to win a battle by deliberately throwing away every advantage we have." She could see the hegemony forces adjusting their positions, trying to predict the alliance's next move. They were still thinking in terms of conventional tactics. The hegemony believes that diverse species cannot truly cooperate because we lack common instincts and tactics. They're right, but what they don't understand is that our differences become strengths when we stop trying to fight like a unified force and start fighting like what we really are: 47 species who have each found their own reasons to hate tyranny. The countdown reached 10 seconds. Kethani vessels phase directly into the enemy formation and create as much chaos as possible. Zephyrian ships, use your stellar maneuvering capabilities to attack from impossible angles. Human vessels, coordinate with whoever needs help, regardless of species. Everyone else, do whatever your species does best when you're angry and surrounded by enemies. The countdown reached 0. All ships, execute close assault. For Marcus Webb. For the Luminari. For freedom! 2,000 ships jumped simultaneously into the heart of the hegemony defensive grid. The battle that followed would be remembered as the most chaotic engagement in galactic military history. Species that had never fought together found themselves cooperating instinctively, each contributing their unique capabilities to the larger fight. Kethani vessels phased between dimensions, appearing behind hegemony ships and disappearing before return fire could be coordinated. Zephyrian plasma conduits, designed to operate in stellar coronas, carved through hegemony armor like it was paper. Human vessels, lacking the exotic capabilities of their allies, threw themselves into the gaps between allied formations, using their ships as shields to protect more valuable assets. In the chaos of close combat, the hegemony's superior coordination and numbers became irrelevant. Individual ship commanders made their own tactical decisions based on immediate circumstances, creating a fluid battle that no central command could control or predict. And throughout it all, the Alliance held together not because of unified command structure or compatible tactics, but because every species present had their own reasons for hating the hegemony and their own ways of expressing that hatred through violence. The battle for the Nexus system had begun. The outcome would determine whether Marcus Webb's promise would be kept or whether the galaxy would remain under hegemony rule for another 1,000 years. As Sarah watched Allied ships dancing between enemy fire, each fighting according to their own nature, while somehow contributing to a greater whole, she realized that Webb had been right about more than just human nature. The galaxy's diversity wasn't a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be embraced. The hegemony was about to learn what happened when an empire built on conformity faced an alliance built on the celebration of differences. The battle raged for 18 hours. When it finally ended, the space around the Nexus system's orbital platforms was littered with the wreckage of both hegemony and alliance vessels. But it was hegemony ships that made up the majority of the debris field. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the makeshift command center that had been established aboard the captured first orbital platform. looking out at the impossible sight of freed luminary energy beings dancing between the stars. Without their forced bondage to power hegemony systems, the ancient energy creatures had regained their freedom for the first time in a millennium. "Captain," reported Admiral Vashti, her crystalline form now bearing the scars of battle, "final casualty reports are coming in from all Allied fleets." The close assault tactics had been successful beyond all expectations, but the cost had been enormous. How many did we lose? 437 vessels destroyed, approximately 60,000 personnel killed or missing. Vashti paused. "But, Captain, those losses were distributed across 47 species. No single fleet was decimated." Sarah nodded grimly. The shared sacrifice had actually strengthened the alliance bonds rather than weakening them. Every species had bled together, fought together, and won together. What about the hegemony forces? Completely destroyed or captured. Over 8,000 vessels, including 3 command dreadnoughts. But more importantly, we have secured the central communication hub that coordinates hegemony operations across this entire galactic sector. Through the observation windows, Sarah could see human engineers working alongside Chthoni technicians and Zephyrian specialists to understand the captured hegemony technology. The cooperation that had been forged in battle was now being applied to the equally complex task of dismantling an empire. "Captain Chen," came a familiar voice. Sarah turned to see Elder Thekvar approaching, supported by a walking frame, but moving with more energy than she had seen from him since their first meeting. "Elder, you shouldn't have made the journey from Kepler 442b. The medical facilities here aren't equipped for—" "Captain," Thekvar interrupted with a smile that transformed his ancient features, "I am 147 years old. I have waited 73 years to see Marcus Webb's promise fulfilled. Do you really think I would miss this moment?" Sarah realized that the old Varani was right. This wasn't just a military victory. It was the completion of a promise that had shaped the destiny of dozens of species. "Elder, there's something you need to know. The hegemony's main fleet, the 10,000 ships that were mobilizing to attack Kepler 442b, they're still out there. This victory bought us time, but it didn't end the war." The Kekfar's golden eyes gleamed with an emotion Sarah had never seen there before. Fierce joy. "Captain, you still don't understand what you've accomplished. May I show you something?" He activated a portable holographic projector, displaying a real-time map of this region of the galaxy. Red indicators showed hegemony-controlled systems, while green markers indicated the location of various allied species. But as Sarah watched, the map began to change. Green indicators were appearing throughout hegemony space, spreading like wildfire from system to system. "What am I looking at?" Sarah asked. "Revolution," Thekvar replied simply. "Every species that has been waiting for someone to prove that the hegemony could be defeated. Your victory here has been broadcast across the galaxy by the Luminari. Energy beings exist in every star system, Captain. They have been spreading the news of your success faster than any communication system ever devised." The scale of what was happening began to sink in. The battle for the Nexus system hadn't just been a military victory. It had been a symbol that had inspired uprisings across hundreds of worlds. "Captain Chen," Torres announced from the communication station that had been hastily installed in the command center, "we're receiving reports from across the sector. Hegemony garrisons on 42 worlds have been overwhelmed by local uprisings. Hegemony fleet elements are reporting wholesale defections as conscripted species turn on their commanders." Admiral Vashti moved to the tactical display, studying the incoming reports. "Captain, this is unprecedented in galactic history. We're not seeing isolated rebellions. We're seeing the coordinated collapse of imperial authority across multiple sectors simultaneously." Sarah stared at the display, watching as more and more systems declared independence from hegemony rule. How is this level of coordination possible? The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the freed Luminari appeared in the command center, its form a shifting pattern of light and energy that somehow conveyed both ancient wisdom and profound gratitude. Captain Chen, the being, spoke directly into their minds. My people have existed since the first stars were born. We have watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. Never before have we seen a species willing to risk everything to free beings they had never met. The luminaries' form shifted, showing images of battles being fought across the galaxy. Your victory here was not just military, it was moral. Every oppressed species has realized that if beings as different as humans, Kethanis, Etherians, and Virani can fight together successfully, then resistance is not only possible but inevitable. Sarah felt the weight of realization settling on her shoulders. Marcus Webb's promise to help one species had grown into something that was reshaping the entire galactic political structure. "Captain," Torres called out urgently, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. It's Admiral Harrison." The communication link established, showing Harrison's face on the main display. The Admiral looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Sarah, I don't know whether to congratulate you or court-martial you. What you've accomplished is beyond anything we hoped for. But the political situation is developing faster than we can track." "Sir? The hegemony's main fleet, those 10,000 ships, they're not moving toward Kepler 442b anymore. They're heading back toward hegemony core systems to suppress the uprisings. But here's the problem. Earth is receiving diplomatic contact requests from over 200 species asking to join the Free Species Alliance." Sarah realized the implications immediately. "We're not just fighting a war anymore. We're accidentally founding a galactic government." "Exactly. And Sarah, we need you back at Earth immediately. The Colonial Authority Council is being expanded to include representatives from every allied species, and they want the architect of this alliance to help design its future structure." Before Sarah could respond, Elder Thekvar stepped forward. "Admiral Harrison, if I may speak." Harrison nodded, recognizing the old Virani from intelligence briefings. "Admiral, Captain Chen has indeed architected this alliance, but she did not create the foundation it rests upon. That foundation was built by Marcus Webb 73 years ago, when he chose to help strangers simply because it was the right thing to do." The Kvar moved to stand beside Sarah. "What your species has accomplished is not the result of superior strategy or technology. It is the result of moral consistency. When faced with a choice between safety and justice, you chose justice. When faced with a choice between profit and principle, you chose principle. When faced with a choice between isolation and involvement, you chose to get involved." The elder looked directly at Harrison through the communication link. "Every species in this alliance followed humans into battle not because we believed you could defeat the hegemony, but because we believed you would try. And in a galaxy where most species have learned to accept oppression as inevitable, the sight of someone willing to try was more inspiring than any weapon." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Elder Thekvar, are you saying that we won this war because of idealism?" "I am saying you won this war because your idealism was backed by the willingness to sacrifice everything to make it real. The hegemony's greatest weakness was their inability to understand that some species fight harder when victory seems impossible." As if summoned by their conversation, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The hegemony's main fleet had fragmented as entire species within their own military forces turned against their commanders. Hegemony colonial governors were surrendering to local populations rather than face the prospect of being overrun by uprisings. The 1,000-year empire was collapsing not from external pressure, but from the sudden realization by oppressed populations that resistance was possible. "Captain," Vashti reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the remnants of the Hegemony Ruling Council. They're requesting terms for surrender." Sarah looked around the command center at the faces of beings from dozens of species, all united by the shared experience of fighting for something greater than themselves. She thought about Marcus Webb, a junior officer who had made a promise he couldn't possibly keep, and how that promise had grown into a force capable of toppling the most powerful empire in galactic history. "Tell the Hegemony Council," Sarah said. "The terms will be negotiated by representatives of all free species, and that the only acceptable outcome is the complete dismantling of their imperial system." "Well," she paused, then added, "and tell them that this negotiation is taking place not because they are offering to surrender, but because a human named Marcus Webb believed that justice should be tempered with mercy." 6 months later, Sarah stood once again in the memorial hall on Kepler 442b, but now it looked very different. The walls that had once held only images of destruction and loss now also displayed pictures of liberation and hope. Representatives from over 300 species had gathered for the formal establishment of the Galactic Free Species Confederation. Elder Thekvar, now bearing the title of first historian of the Confederation, stood before Marcus Webb's portrait to deliver the closing address of the Constitutional Convention. "We gather here in the presence of the man whose promise changed the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying to beings throughout the hall and across the stars via quantum communication links. Marcus Webb could not have known that his words to a dying people would become the foundation for a new galactic order. But he understood something that empires never learn: that kindness is not weakness, and that promises matter most when they are hardest to keep. Sarah, now wearing the insignia of Admiral of the Confederation Fleet, watched as beings from hundreds of worlds formally committed their species to the principles that Webb had embodied: that freedom was worth fighting for, that justice was worth dying for, and that no being should be abandoned simply because helping them was dangerous. "The galaxy will remember this day," Thekvar continued, "not as the day the hegemony fell, but as the day that diverse species proved they could build something better than empire. We have learned that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. We have learned that cooperation is more powerful than conquest, and we have learned that a promise made in kindness can become a force that reshapes the stars themselves." As the ceremony concluded and representatives began making their way back to their home worlds, Sarah found herself alone with Webb's portrait. She thought about the chain of events that had led from one man's compassion to the liberation of thousands of worlds. "You did it, Marcus," she said quietly. "Your promise was kept." Behind her, a voice that had become familiar over the months of alliance building spoke up. It was one of the luminari who had taken to visiting the memorial hall regularly, Captain Admiral Chen. The energy being corrected itself, Marcus Webb's promise was not just kept, it was multiplied. Every species that joins the Confederation makes the same promise to others, that injustice will be remembered and acted upon, that the strong will protect the weak, and that no cry for help will go unanswered. Sarah nodded, understanding that Webb's legacy was not just the defeat of the hegemony, but the creation of a galactic civilization based on the principle that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. As she prepared to leave Kepler 442b and return to her duties coordinating the Confederation's expansion, Sarah received one final message. It was from a remote system on the edge of known space, transmitted by a species that had never before made contact with galactic civilization. "To the humans who keep their promises," the message said, "we are the eternal wanderers, and we have been fleeing persecution for 1,000 years. We have heard of your confederation, of your willingness to help those who cannot help themselves. We do not ask for military aid or material support. We ask only for what Marcus Webb gave to the Virani, hope that someone, somewhere, remembers that justice matters." Sarah smiled, realizing that Webb's promise would continue to grow and multiply, inspiring new generations of beings to stand against oppression wherever they found it. The galaxy had learned that humans never forgot kindness, and their revenge on those who committed injustice could indeed rock entire worlds. But more importantly, the galaxy had learned that when different species worked together in the name of justice, they could accomplish things that no single civilization could achieve alone. Marcus Webb's promise had become something greater than he could ever have imagined, proof that the universe, despite all its cruelties and injustices, still had room for hope. And in a galaxy where hope had been in short supply for far too long, that was the greatest victory of all.